I came to study, just like I'd told myself 100 times on the bus ride over, reminding my brain that this was all about concentration, deadlines, getting my life in some vaguely responsible order. But the moment I stepped into the bookstore, quiet, lined with dark wood shelves, a faint smell of old paper and coffee, I realized control was a polite lie. She was leaning over a counter, cataloging a stack of textbooks with that casual precision that made it look like the world could bend around her if she willed it. Mid-40s, but the kind of presence that made you forget counting years. She carried herself like someone who had learned to shape moments rather than be shaped by them. I noticed the little details, the slight crease at the corner of her eyes when she smiled, the faint scent of jasmine that drifted when she leaned over the table. "Need any help?" she said, not in a teachery way, more like she already knew I might, even if I didn't admit it to myself. I opened my mouth, closed it again, and muttered something useless about finding a rare reference book. My words fell flat, which was somehow both humiliating and thrilling. She tilted her head, observing me like a scientist taking notes, but there was warmth in her gaze. It wasn't judgment, exactly, it was interest, a kind of quiet scrutiny that made me feel both exposed and seen. I followed her to the back corner, where the shelves were narrower and the light dimmer. My hands brushed the spines of old leather-bound texts, trying to look casual, though every nerve felt like it had switched to high alert. She crouched to reach a book on the lower shelf, and for a second, our eyes met at the same level. The world outside the shelves seemed to vanish, dust motes hanging in the air, the soft hum of a distant espresso machine, everything sharpening to the curve of her smile. "You know," she said, straightening up, letting her hand linger on the shelf, "I can show you a few things that aren't in the textbooks." Her tone was light, teasing, but there was a subtle edge, a confidence that suggested she had done this before, distracted someone, or maybe herself, with just a glance. I laughed, because I didn't know what else to do, but it came out too loud, echoing slightly. She tilted her head, raising one eyebrow, as if she could see right through my effort to play it cool. Then she walked away to fetch the book, her steps measured, deliberate, and I found myself counting the spaces between them, counting breaths I didn't realize I was holding. When she returned, she handed me the book, but her fingers brushed mine for just a fraction of a second longer than necessary. My heart jolted like I'd been hit with a small electric current. I wanted to look away, but couldn't. She smiled, that quiet, knowing smile, and said nothing more, letting the moment hang between us. I spent the next hour reading, or pretending to, because my attention kept drifting. My mind replayed that hand brush, her laughter, the tilt of her head. Every detail etched itself into my awareness. The soft hum of her voice as she walked past, the way the afternoon light caught strands of her hair. And the strangest part? I didn't feel embarrassed. Not really. Just alive in a way I hadn't expected. When I finally left, the book tucked under my arm, I kept thinking about her. About that subtle touch. About the way she had made a quiet corner of a bookstore feel like the center of the world. And in the back of my mind, I knew I would be back, not just for the books, but for that impossible, unspoken spark. I didn't expect to run into her again so soon, but there she was, behind the counter, rearranging a display of journals with her usual meticulous precision. The bookstore smelled warmer today, coffee steam mingling with the old paper scent, and sunlight drifting in through the tall windows made everything feel softer. She glanced up, gave me a small nod, and returned to her task. No greeting, no tease, just that quiet acknowledgement that made me feel like I had entered her orbit and she was letting me stay, conditionally. I picked a corner near her and started unpacking the stack of reference books I had brought, trying not to stare, trying not to notice how her hands moved with effortless grace, even in such mundane tasks. "You've done this before," I said quietly, half to myself, half in hope that she'd respond. Her head lifted slightly, and for a heartbeat, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Hesitation, maybe even a flicker of fatigue. She gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile, then returned to straightening the books. "More than you'd think," she murmured, her voice low, careful. I watched her for a moment longer, The crease at her brow when she concentrated, the way her fingers lingered on the edges of the books, the slight slump of her shoulders that hinted at exhaustion beneath her composed exterior. It made her human, fragile in a way I hadn't expected from someone who seemed so controlled, so self-assured. I stepped closer, pretending to adjust a book on the lower shelf. She glanced up again, caught me fidgeting, and shook her head, a quiet admonishment. I laughed nervously. She didn't reply, just moved past me, brushing against my arm briefly. That tiny contact, unintended or deliberate, I couldn't tell, sent a shiver through me. "Do you rest?" I asked impulsively, my words awkward. She paused, a thin line of surprise crossing her face before she masked it. Her eyes flicked away to the window. "Sometimes," she said. The hesitation was subtle, but I noticed it. Her hands tightened around a stack of journals. She exhaled, and I could almost hear the weight she carried, the unspoken exhaustion she refused to voice. I wanted to say something comforting, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I arranged the books beside her silently, letting the moment hang. The quiet between us felt thick, charged, like the air before a storm. Then she leaned just slightly closer to grab another journal, and our shoulders brushed. She didn't pull away. My heart thumped, loud in my chest, but I dared not move. I caught a faint whiff of her perfume, soft, understated, and suddenly everything else blurred into the background. She straightened, and in that brief moment, our eyes met again. There was an unspoken acknowledgement, fragile, tense, impossible to define. I could feel it in the brush of her hand against mine, in the way her lips quirked in the tiniest smile, in the pause that stretched too long to be casual. And as she returned to her work, I realized I would remember that fleeting closeness for hours afterward, playing over it in my mind, imagining what it would mean if the space between us shrank even a fraction more. The rain started just as I was leaving the bookstore, soft at first, then growing heavier, drumming against the tall windows like it was trying to write its own story. I had lingered longer than I intended, pretending to check my notes, but really, I was watching her straighten the shelves, the curl of her hair falling over her shoulder, the faint tension in her back. She looked up and caught me staring. Not accusingly, just aware. There was something electric in the pause that followed, like the room had condensed into the space between us. I wanted to cross it, to say something reckless, something that would shatter the careful balance, but the words lodged in my throat. "I think this is the one," she said softly, holding up a thin, leather-bound journal. Her fingers brushed mine as she handed it over, and it felt like sparks traveled through that brief contact. I froze, aware of how absurdly aware I had become of her presence. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, and the bookstore felt small, private, suspended from the world. I opened my mouth, intending to say something, anything, but just then her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, her expression tightening for a second, then softened again. Some man, probably her ex, judging by the half-smile and the sigh she let slip. She didn't answer. The tension didn't break, though. If anything, it made the moment sharper. I realized how much I wanted to reach out, to ask her if she was okay, to bridge the invisible gap. But rules, decorum, self-preservation, they all pressed down on me. I stayed put, pretending to arrange a stack of books, feeling my pulse in my ears. She laughed suddenly, low and brief, a sound that made me forget the storm outside, forget myself even. I glanced up. Her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. And then, just as I thought I might move closer, maybe touch her hand again, the front door opened. A young woman stepped in, umbrella dripping, talking loudly, unaware of the fragile charge in the air. She stopped just long enough to comment on the books, breaking the spell. I stepped back instinctively. She gave a tiny shake of her head, almost imperceptible, and turned to help the newcomer. That near moment, the one I wanted to leap into, the one that hovered like an unanswered question, was gone, vanished like mist. I lingered at the counter, watching her straighten the journals again. Her hands, her hair, the tilt of her head, every detail etched itself into my memory. I wanted to tell her, "I notice everything about you," but restraint held me silent. And yet, as she reached for a book and our fingers brushed one last time before she handed it to me, I felt the unspoken tremor between us. Not a confession, not a kiss, just the echo of a possibility that neither of us dared name. I left into the rain, the journal clutched to my chest, and couldn't stop replaying that one charged second where the world had paused, and everything felt possible, yet impossible at the same time. I found her in the quiet corner of the bookstore again, this time with the windows fogged from the rain outside. The world had slowed to a muted rhythm, the soft drip of water, the faint hum of the heater, the occasional rustle of pages. I had no excuse to be there, and she didn't ask. Somehow, the silence between us had grown heavier, more insistently intimate. We stood near the same shelf as before, neither speaking. I caught her glancing at me, just slightly, then looking away, as if measuring what she could allow herself. Her hands hovered over the books, but she wasn't rearranging them anymore. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers flexed against the smooth spines. Finally, she spoke, quiet enough that I had to lean in. "Do you ever think about what this is?" Her eyes were fixed somewhere beyond me, on the rain-streaked glass. Her voice wasn't accusatory, just raw, weighted with something I couldn't name immediately. I swallowed. Sometimes, I admitted, though the words felt inadequate. "I don't know if I'm supposed to." She let out a breath, long and deliberate. "Me neither. But pretending it's nothing, it's harder than I thought." She finally looked at me, and for a second, everything faltered. The careful boundaries, the polite distance, all gone. Her gaze searched mine, steady and fearless, and I realized I was equally unprepared. I wanted to reach out, to say I feel it too, but even that would be too much. Instead, I just watched her. The soft curve of her lips, the tired crease near her eyes, the way she rocked slightly on the balls of her feet. It was magnetic and terrifying all at once. "I hate that I think about it," she said suddenly, her voice breaking the quiet again, closer now. "I hate that I'm here." Her hands gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white. "I hate that it feels like it matters." I stayed silent. There was nothing to say that could untangle the weight between us. Nothing I could offer to lessen it. I could only exist in the same space, breathing the same recycled air, feeling my chest tighten with every heartbeat. She took a step back, tentative, almost as if distancing herself would make it bearable. "Do you ever feel that we're crossing lines we can't take back?" The words were barely a whisper. Her eyes glistened, not with anger or judgment, but something far sharper, vulnerability. Raw, human, terrifying vulnerability. I wanted to tell her that I understood, that I was tangled in the same impossible pull, but I didn't, because saying it would change everything. And maybe it already had. The silence returned, heavier now, oppressive in its honesty. It wasn't quiet. It was full of all the things we couldn't say, all the possibilities we were too afraid to name. I watched her, memorizing the tilt of her head, the subtle tremor of her hands. Then she exhaled sharply and whispered, almost to herself, almost to the rain outside. "Maybe we should stop pretending this is normal." I couldn't look away. I couldn't speak. And somehow, that line, so fragile, so devastating, etched itself into me, leaving me aware that nothing would ever feel ordinary again. I found her sitting at the little wooden table near the back of the store, a stack of journals beside her and a single mug of coffee untouched. Her eyes were distant, staring at the rain streaking down the window like she was trying to read something inside it. I hesitated, standing just out of reach, unsure if I should interrupt or if the air itself had become too fragile to touch. "Do you ever look back?" she asked suddenly, voice low and hesitant, as if she weren't sure she wanted an answer. I tilted my head. "At what?" I murmured. She gave a bitter little laugh, not quite humor, more like a shake of disbelief. "At everything. At choices. At people who left marks you can't erase." Her fingers traced idle circles around the rim of her mug. I watched, and I noticed the small tremor in her hands, the way her shoulders slumped, subtle but undeniable. "I lost someone," she continued, almost whispering to herself. "Not a day goes by I don't think about them. And sometimes, she paused, her voice catching. Sometimes it feels like they're still here, in the corners of everything I do. She looked up at me then, eyes glossy but steady. The vulnerability was raw and human and terrifying. I didn't move. I wanted to say something comforting, but what could I possibly offer to that? I only knew the way my chest had tightened, the way her words struck an ache I didn't know existed in me yet. I shouldn't be talking about this, she said, a flash of shame crossing her features. It's too much. You're not, I said quietly, and I realized she believed me. I realized in that moment that my presence alone mattered, that listening, simply standing here, mattered more than any clumsy words I could offer. Then her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, hesitated, and a voicemail notification popped up. She frowned, curious but cautious, then tapped to play it. A soft, trembling voice from years ago, one she had buried somewhere inside her, spilled out. A recording of a man she had loved, someone she had lost unexpectedly. She pressed pause halfway, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. I leaned a fraction closer, feeling the impossibility of the intimacy. Her fingers brushed mine, accidental, but my whole body remembered it. Her eyes were on me now, wide, raw, fragile. It's stupid, she said, voice catching again. But hearing that, it's like he's here. And not here. And she shook her head and looked away, the weight of unspoken memories pressing down. I wanted to tell her it was okay. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to carry it alone anymore. But I stayed silent, letting the quiet fill the space between us. Let her breathe it, let her feel it. She exhaled, finally looking back at me with a tremor in her lips, a question in her gaze she didn't voice. And in that suspended moment, I felt it, the shift. Something fragile had cracked, some wall between her past and now, and somehow, without a word, she had let me in, just a fraction, where no one else had been. She set the phone down, eyes lingering on mine. Maybe some things are meant to be remembered, she whispered. And I knew I would never forget this. Her hands, her voice, the tremble in the quiet, and the way the world had shifted without a single dramatic gesture. The bookstore was empty that evening, except for us, the dim amber light of the lamps casting long shadows across the shelves. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle, tapping against the windows like a steady heartbeat. I found her by the back table again, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, her eyes distant. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. She glanced up, saw me, and gave a faint, tired smile. It wasn't performative. It wasn't flirtatious. It was the kind of smile that said, I know you see me, all of me, and I see you too. I stepped closer, careful not to break the fragile rhythm that had settled between us over weeks of quiet moments and almost touching glances. You don't have to pretend anymore, I said softly, letting the words float in the space between us. She tilted her head, studying me for a moment, like weighing whether the honesty was safe. Finally, she let out a breath, slow and deliberate, and relaxed a fraction. I've tried, she admitted, voice barely above the hum of the heater. Tried to ignore it, to ignore us. I nodded, understanding. I didn't argue. I didn't say that I had felt the same, the tension, the pull, the impossible gravity that drew me toward her. It was unnecessary. She already knew. We had always known. We stood side by side, moving slowly through the stacks of books, arranging a few that needed it. The air was quiet, heavy with unspoken acknowledgement. There were no declarations, no grand gestures, just the subtle understanding that this connection, fragile and imperfect, had become real. I could feel it in the brush of her sleeve against my arm, the occasional catch of her fingers on mine as we reached for the same book. At one point, she stopped and looked up at me, her eyes softer than I had ever seen them. I don't want to lose this, she whispered. Not the words I had imagined, not a confession of love, but an admission of trust, of acceptance. I smiled faintly and reached out, letting my hand rest over hers, fingertips brushing. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her hand settle beneath mine, small and deliberate, grounding both of us in the moment. It was not dramatic. It was not perfect. It was real. We moved to the corner by the window, the last of the rain dripping softly outside, and sat. She leaned slightly against me, and I rested my forehead gently against hers. No words were needed. The silence spoke volumes, the shared understanding, the earned connection, the quiet acknowledgement that we had navigated tension, fear, and restraint to arrive here, together in a way that felt inevitable, not forced. I could feel her breath, the slight rise and fall of her shoulders. I could feel the warmth of her hand beneath mine. It was enough. It was everything. For the first time in weeks, the quiet was comforting, not heavy. The unspoken promise lingered between us. Not love declared, not romance announced, but a mutual decision to exist in this shared space, fully aware, fully present. And in that silence, I realized it didn't need words. It didn't need perfection. Just this, just her, just me, just the space we had earned together was final enough. It's strange, looking back now, how ordinary it all seemed at the time. The rain tapping against the windows, the soft hum of the heater, the faint scent of old paper in the bookstore. But I remember the weight of it, the intensity hidden in ordinary moments. We weren't dramatic. We didn't shout or declare grand proclamations. We simply existed, side by side, learning how to inhabit the same space without breaking the fragile trust between us. I've changed since then. I noticed details I would have overlooked before. The way someone's hand lingers on a book, the pause in a laugh, the subtle shifts in tone that hint at vulnerability. I've learned to be patient, to feel without rushing, to let moments arrive and settle naturally. And her, she carries herself differently now, lighter somehow. Not because anything has been solved or erased. There are memories that still sting, but because she allowed herself to let someone in, to share space, to be understood without explanation. There's a quiet confidence in that vulnerability, the kind that makes a person glow softly rather than loudly. We don't label what we feel. We don't need to. The connection is there in gestures, a hand brushing another, a shared smile across a crowded room, a brief silence that doesn't feel awkward. It's in the pauses, the near touches, the words we don't say but still convey everything. We've learned that intimacy doesn't always need a name. It thrives in subtlety, in earned trust, in quiet acknowledgement. Sometimes I catch myself replaying moments, the brush of her hand against mine, the way she leaned slightly when I rested my forehead against hers, the laugh that slipped out when the world outside felt far away. And I smile, because those moments weren't perfect. They were messy, uncertain, human. But that's exactly what made them unforgettable. We discovered that love, or whatever this is, isn't about fireworks or declarations. It's about presence, about showing up even when it's inconvenient or terrifying. It's about patience, observation, and the courage to let someone see you with all your flaws and scars. And in the quiet of the bookstore, or on the rare afternoons when it's just us, that understanding settles around us like a soft, warm light. We've learned that closeness isn't always about physical proximity. It's about allowing the other person to exist in your life fully, without demands, without expectation, without trying to force perfection. So when I look back, I don't think about what we could have said or done differently. I think about the way she made me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced before, and how that changed me. How it changed the way I understand connection, patience, and the subtle art of staying. And maybe that's the point. Love doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it lingers quietly, in gestures and silences, in moments you almost miss but never quite forget. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?